Perfect. All right, we'll get started and I'll keep an eye on the waiting room if anyone does join us. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the presentation today and take advantage of the Western Slope Fair this afternoon. There's a lot of great things that'll be happening. I'll be presenting on this again later this afternoon, so tell your friends if they have any questions about the gap year. My name is Sarah Kolaski. I'm the Regional Director of Admissions for Sacred Heart University. I'm actually based here in Denver, Colorado, so I do work with students based in the Western and Midwestern regions of the United States. So my job is to kind of help with a national initiative as we're thinking about admissions for students coming from farther distances. But today I want to talk about considering a gap year. This has been probably one of the most increasingly interesting topics because of the nature of the last couple of years with COVID and what students are starting to think about and take as value when they're thinking about that next step after high school. This is going to be a little bit more straightforward because every case is going to be different. So I hope this provides you with the resources to think intentionally about this process and also to really think about what is going to make sense for you and making sure that you're in communications with those schools should you decide to take a gap year and how to handle those next steps. So to start, what is a gap year? It's usually a period of time after high school, really taking a chance to take yourself out of the regimented scheduling that you have with your high school career. I know you're often thinking about how you are kind of in this class setting, about 7 to 8 classes a day, and wanting to whether go to college and starting in a certain major and being able to specialize what you're interested in studying, or even taking that personal growth. And I think students have decided to take advantage of this particular opportunity because of wanting to have that time for self-reflection. I know there was a lot that's happened in the last couple of years, and it's still a very small margin of students who will take a gap year. Before COVID, it was about 4 to 5% a year of high school seniors taking a gap year, deciding on whatever they wanted to do in that year. But now that's probably gone up to about 10 to 15%. So we're seeing the interest, we're seeing there being more opportunities, and it can look completely different depending on what you want to do. So why take one? These are kind of the main reasons why students will want to take a gap year. If you want to take the time, go into a part-time job, a full-time job, kind of save some extra money, put that aside if you are going to be contributing to your college tuition and room and board. This is a great way to take advantage of that. If you're going through the process with athletics, there's a lot of different avenues that could be considered for this, where if you want to take an extra year to participate in your sport at kind of like a junior league level, and take a year to really decide if that's something you want to continue at the college and professional level, that's something that students might consider in that process. Volunteerism. Very common, students going on trips, whether in their local communities or internationally, and wanting to just really broaden their horizons and be a part of something more so than just being a tourist in those situations. I know that Boulder, Colorado has a really big program called Where There Are Dragons, and that connects students to year-long programs in Asia, Latin America, and Africa to engage students in those cultural immersive settings and really engage them in wanting to just learn more about the world. If you have the opportunity to take advantage of an internship or research opportunities, that's always a great thing to consider as well. Kind of falls under paid work just because internships and research might have a paid or a stipend associated with that. So that's another thing that students can consider if you just want to get that professional development experience. And again, helping you decide if you are truly undecided about a major. There are a lot of schools that will support students through that time and usually have until sophomore year of college to declare. But if you are truly undecided and you want to wait a semester or a year, that's a great way to kind of help you decide whether or not this is going to be a good fit. And I said, kind of travel, again, having those exploration opportunities, really going outside of your comfort zone, building that independence, and that sort of opportunity to self-reflect, or just having a general break from academic commitments. We know that it's very easy for students to be burnt out, and this is a completely valid reason to take some time, really reflect on what is going to be the next step for you and what's going to make the most sense moving forward. And then just overall benefits. So I know there's always this idea, okay, if I'm going to take a gap year, I'm going to be behind in terms of my peers who go into college right away. I will say 90% of students who take a gap year will go right into a four-year institution within that year. So again, that intentionality needs to be there, that deliberance needs to be there in terms of having a plan, having an idea of what is going to help you during that year, fulfill what you want to do on that in that personal growth, but then also be prepared. And it's not supposed to just be this long-term vacation. It's something that is supposed to be fruitful and really helping you kind of develop those important skills that you want to pursue after that. I will say that the national graduation rate it's a 6-year graduation rate. It's about 62% for a bachelor's degree too. So there might be a chance that you are graduating among your peers if you did start a year later, because students kind of have different pathways when it comes to their own college experience. They may wait a semester, they may take a semester off during their time in college, so that the chances of you actually being behind is very minimal comparatively, even though you're actively taking that whole year off. And then and we found that students who did take that year off, they were a lot more prepared. They were more prepared for the job field, because if they went into some type of professional development or paid work opportunity, they were more employable because they already had an understanding of what the workforce kind of looked like. You're automatically enhancing those skill sets, whether tangible or intangible, because you're taking advantage of something that is kind of in this sort of atypical, non-traditional path, but still very important and still doable. So it really does help them kind of develop those important skills, and having that self-reliance for yourself. And then also just being prepared in terms of your career and major. I think it gives students a chance to breathe and really think about, okay, what do I really want to do? What classes should I be taking? And there's also the opportunity to consider community college classes and taking those classes to transfer over. That is something I'll talk about a little bit later in terms of admissions, because it is going to vary from school to school. But students do feel a lot more prepared, and they often come in with higher GPAs. They come in with those sort of adaptive skill set as you are transitioning to a new setting, which is a big transition for most students going into college, the next step anyway, but kind of giving yourself that time to think about it really helps that long-term growth. And also just helping with your overall your own personal attributes, and really helping enhance those ideas of responsibility and awareness, and wanting to have those that flexibility, that opportunity to grow in different settings. So it's not something that is going to hurt you. I will say that if you have, like I said, that plan and the means to do so, I think a gap year is a great thing to consider. I've talked to students in my personal experiences who felt a lot more prepared, and they had their own different goals, and this was something that made the most sense to them. I worked with particularly a lot of athletes who decided to either take on a junior league. I remember I worked with a student one year who was part of our club. She wanted to be a part of our club figure skating program, and she was like, I'm going to defer a year because the following year I'm going to be training for the Winter Olympics. And then she came back and she's like, I feel way more prepared. She still got to do 4 full years of competing on our synchronized club figure skating team, and also compete at that global level too. So I think students coming in with all these different ideas and expectations, this will help kind of move them forward. So how to prepare. So I will say, as I've kind of said throughout this presentation, it's a year on. It's not a year to just sit and watch TV all day and play video games all day. This is something where we want you to be intentional about what you're doing, have a plan in place, and really start to think about it now. If you are a senior on this presentation, I would start kind of outlining a plan or something with intention to start those next steps, because it does take some time, because you're going to have to also consider the admissions process, and every school is going to be different. So the most common ways that this can be handled is students will apply as they would as a high school senior. And if you've decided on a school and you really are like, okay, this is where I want to be, this is what I want, this is where I want to go, I want to defer for a year. So there might be a chance that you'd still have to submit that deposit to hold your seat for the following year. They might just say, okay, we'll make a note to defer you and then reach out in January, or they might have you wait until the following cycle to even apply. So these are questions that you'd be wanting to ask your admissions counselors. And I bring this up also with if you are considering taking community college courses, and how to handle applying, whether you do apply as a high school senior or you wait until the following year to apply, because there's going to be different policies on whether or not a student might be considered a transfer student if they've taken any college courses, or if you maintain a part-time status, they might still have you transfer in as a first-year student. So it's a good question to ask, just because the overall theme of that is going to be, it depends. For Sacred Heart, we do require, if students are considering a deferral process, we ask them to apply as a high school senior. They would still submit their deposit before the May 1 deadline, and then they would have their seat ready to go. We do offer deposit extensions until the January of that year. So there is some flexibility there, but that is something that you'd want to ask your counselors as you're kind of navigating that process. So I talked about this. It is a little bit smaller, like I said, and it's also important too, in terms of scholarship, because it can, if you do change status, whether you change status as a first-year student or a transfer student, that can impact what kind of scholarships and financial aid you might be considered for. For us, when we ask students to deposit in the May before they're deciding to attend, if they decided to defer, we will freeze their scholarship for consideration. And if we do make any changes, we will reevaluate them with the new scholarship scale if needed. But it's a really great thing to consider, like, again, great thing to consider, but just knowing kind of the nuances that go into it as well. And also talk to, like I said, there's also the Colorado College GapYear Research Consortium. So they've done a lot of research in making sure that students do feel supported, but Colorado College has a great resource for you to kind of navigate this process and make sure that you have all of those resources down the line and make sure that you're prepared for that next step. And these are kind of the general overview of the main gap year contacts for students. So if you are considering any travel, if you want any internships opportunities, these are all the great resources to take advantage of and see what's available kind of within your own community, or if you're looking to kind of leave and go elsewhere. These are all great resources too. And if you want to take a screenshot, or this presentation will also be available later on as well. And that's kind of it. So it's a very, very broad overview about the process, but I hope it gave you some good insights as to what to consider as you're going through a gap year transition, because it is something we're seeing it's growing in terms of interest, and a lot of schools have offered a lot more resources to make it feasible for students now because of everything that's happened. So I'm going to open it up to questions, because it is, again, it's a short presentation, but yeah, let me know what questions you have. And feel free, if you want to utilize the chat, or if you want to be on microphone, either one is fine.
I have a question. So, I've been thinking of taking a gap year for a while, to go to Israel. And so, on your presentation, you said like understand the difference between deferring and taking a gap year. Could you like explain more what you meant by that?
Sure. So that refers to the admissions process. So it depends if you decided to start applying as a high school senior, as you normally would if you were on track to go to college that following fall. That process involves a deferral. So if you know, okay, this is where I want to go, I want to hold my seat for the following fall, you would reach out to those admissions offices to say, hey, I would like to hold my seat. Taking a gap year also means like if you would just kind of go in and you have a plan for that year. You may not have necessarily committed to a school, but you're taking a gap year, and then when you apply the following year, which you would apply that following fall, you would just make a note that you took a gap year on the application itself, which all applications, including Common App, Coalition, and then any specific, will have a section about, okay, what was your if you have an educational disruption. And one of them is I took a gap year. So that's without having already applied to the school, but that's a good question.
If I were to only do a semester abroad and like come in like spring, how would that work?
Same idea. So again, there are opportunities for students to apply for the spring term of the school of their interest. I would reach out if you have an interest in like if you have your list or have a handful of schools, just see what they prefer. Otherwise, it would just be, you might do your application a little bit later, like in the spring. But there might be schools that say, hey, I want you to like have the opportunity to apply, because if it's only a semester, a deferral might make more sense, just so you kind of know, okay, this is where I want to go. I have my seat and I can start in that spring. So I would reach out to if you have an interest in certain schools, just to let them know and see what their policies would be.
I have a quick question. So is it possible to take like more than one gap year? Because I skipped 2 grades and I don't want to be in college really young, like when I'm 16.
Right.
So, and then I also have athletics that I'm trying to play collegiately. So is it possible to take more than one gap year?
I think it is. That's definitely more uncommon, but with your case, it sounds like, and there are only so many schools that have those like those assimilation programs for students who do start college a little bit younger. Yeah. So I will say, I think if they are aware, like again, I would talk to the counselors of schools you're interested in. I would talk, if you're looking to be a recruited athlete, I would talk to the coaches, because there are coaches who will recruit. I mean, they can't recruit before your rising junior summer, like they can't start talking to you until then, but at least it's something that they might have some insights to, because athletics is probably one of the more common ones, aside from like working in volunteerism. So it's not uncommon to have this type of situation, but 2 years is always going to be a little bit of a rarity, because then the likelihood of students going to college is less. But since you're kind of on that track, and with having gone to school a little bit younger, I would just reach out to those counselors and see what they suggest. But the coaches are going to be a good resource for that too, because they'll want to make sure that your eligibility will maintain all 4 years.
Okay, thank you.
Of course.
I have another question.
Sure.
So if like, let's say you really want to go to one college and then you like apply there and you get in and you like ask to defer for a gap year and they say no, like, would you recommend then just like reapplying to that college after the gap year, or like picking somewhere else to go?
That's a good question. I don't know if a school would outright say, no, you can't defer. They might ask you to reapply though. So you might have to be prepared for that. But before you go through all of that and apply and again, it's going to depend on the school. It's going to depend on their process and even their selectivity and what their seats and enrollment look like every year. But that would be a question I would ask the counselor and say, I know I'm going to do this. What do you recommend? Because you want to make sure that you're considered, you know, appropriately, like as a first year student, making sure you are considered for those scholarships. But that's also a big question to ask how the scholarship would be impacted if you were to apply just either next year or this year to hold your seat, because they might not always freeze the scholarship either. So in those cases, if they're not honoring deferrals, they'll likely have you reapply anyway. So just be prepared for that. Good questions though. This goes until about 10:45, so I will be hanging out here until then. So feel free to keep asking questions. And otherwise, the college fair, I believe, is open. So take advantage, ask those questions to those counselors who are here. And then at 1:15 today, there will be the second set of presentations. So similar topics, some might be in and out, but there will be another round of presentations to participate in as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, hope it was helpful. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One last quick question. So in your experience with athletes, has it made them hard? Is it harder for them to play collegiately because of the gap year?
I don't think so. I think, what sport are you looking to?
Probably golf, but I could also try for volleyball, but most likely golf.
No, with the it's going to vary from sport to sport. I often see in any of those more competitive sports or where coaches are kind of recruiting a couple years out, they might have like, okay, I have a junior commit for you, I have a senior commit for you. So it's not uncommon where if you are going through that, they might have already on their roster, like they're kind of out a few years just because of the competition itself and things change so quickly. So I don't see it impacting athletes that much because the only thing I will say, and this is where it's going to depend on the school, and there was a little bit more flexibility because of COVID where universities, these like deferred athletes, universities did allow students to take like college courses, but depending on the sport and depending on your status, whether you go full-time or part-time can impact eligibility. So you might not be able to, the likelihood of you being able to take classes in those gap years is very low. So that's something I would just be prepared for, because it can turn you into like a transfer status.
Yeah. So you wouldn't get 4 years.
Correct. So that they might see that eligibility clock, and that eligibility clock is activated as soon as you're enrolled somewhere. So that's just something to keep in mind. And if your focus is I'm going to play sports and I'll work or I'm going to do an internship or anything, that's all fine. That's something I would encourage you, but that's just something to be prepared for, because if you're going to do 2 years,
okay,
you might still not have that opportunity. For us this year, and this was the last year we were doing it, but we actually had a student who was deferred for 2 years, and we let her take classes, but she had to stay part-time. So she only could really take like 1 or 2 classes a semester at the local community college. So that's, I'd say, the big thing, but that's such a tricky thing. So you want to always err on the side of caution with that.
For sure. And if what are a lot of colleges policies? I don't know if you know this, but if I were to only take 1 gap year, I would have just turned 17 right before the start of the first semester if I took 1 gap year.
Yeah.
So do you have to be 18 to do a lot of stuff in college, or can you be 17?
I was 17 when I started.
Okay.
So I think it's going to be more at that point where, you know, they want to be mindful of like social emotional learning and making sure like you're in a vulnerable setting, but coming in as a 17-year-old is not uncommon. It's when you get to, and again, some schools have these like very specific programs for students who come in at 15, 16, and they're kind of separate from the rest of campus for that time until they're kind of a little bit more mature, because it is a transition. But 17 is kind of, it's fine, just because you do have students coming in a little bit younger in that sense, like if they, depending on like where their birthday was and when they started school. I was November, so I was turning 17 and then like in college, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I already so I had originally skipped 2 grades, but then my 8th grade year, I did 8th grade twice. And the second time I took just high school classes online.
Got it.
So I went start high school when I was 12. So now it's kind of better a little bit. So I'll probably only have to take 1 gap year. But
yeah, and talk to the coaches and the counselors who you're going to be in touch with, because they're going to help with that, and they'll be able to inform you if like the university does have any policies on that, and or if they say, okay, you might be a special case, maybe do 2 years. Like if the coaches also agree, like, hey, we'll have a spot for you in 2 years, that might be the best way to go. But just because you're a junior now.
I'm only a sophomore.
You're a sophomore. Okay. So yeah, so coaches and if you're looking at any like D1, D2 programs, any scholarship programs, they can reach out July 1 of this upcoming summer for you.
Okay.
So I would start, but basically right now what you can do is just start putting your information on, like if they have like a recruiting questionnaire on their website, on the athletics page, like just to get your information in their system. And then when they're able to start reaching out, they would be able to kind of connect with you and talk about what that could look like. But I think you're okay on that. Like, I don't know, and for like age, I think you'd be okay. It's going to be, again, more your personal preference. And if you're like, do you feel kind of, again, socially and emotionally ready for college at that time? Or, you know, going through the athletics process and see what they say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably fine for me because I'm already like, all of my classes are really with juniors and seniors right now anyway.
Okay.
So I'm kind of already with people who are a lot older.
Okay.
But yeah, can you reach out to coaches your sophomore year, or
they won't be able to respond to you? Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
They can give you very information, like if they do, they'll give you very informational, like this is our program. They won't say anything about recruiting because they cannot legally talk to you until July 1 of your, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it was helpful.
Yeah. Oops.